The exam hall of the Interstellar Academy of Integrated Intellect was more like a cathedral than a classroom. Constructed of anti-radiant alloy and laced with gravimetric stabilizers, the room held an eerie stillness that crushed even whispers. Lights from 7 suns filtered through prism glass above, casting silent geometry onto the marble floor. The Galactic Cognition Benchmarking exam was about to begin. Students filed in by the hundreds, representatives from every species admitted to the Pangalactic Education Treaty. Tall, translucent brachythons. Multi-limbed Sarthi with synaptic translators blinking on their spines. Even the Meklarn, whose brains were grown in zero-G birthing tanks and encoded with generational memories. They were brilliant. All of them. Then there was Ethan Graves. Human. 17 Earth years old. From Minnesota. He carried only a single pen and a small pad, and looked hopelessly underdressed compared to the dermal interface thought nets and neural shrouds worn by his fellow examinees. A brachython 2 rose over gave him a pitying glance through her translucent faceplate. The gesture said it all. Oh stars, they're letting the primitives test again? Ethan didn't seem to notice. He yawned, stretched his arms, and took a seat near the back. A robotic voice echoed from the crystalline ceiling. Welcome to the Galactic Cognition Benchmark. Section: Abstract Multidimensional Problem Solving. Duration: 2.6 Earth hours. You may not communicate, transmit, or interface with external cognition systems. Begin. A sheet of shimmering smart paper projected itself onto each desk. It shifted as it scanned its user, adapting to language preference, spectral visibility, and neurological symmetry. Ethan blinked as his sheet stabilized into a complex lattice of symbols and numbers. At first glance, it looked like chaos. Floating glyphs, impossible equations nested in recursive tensors, even spatially reactive zones that shifted when viewed from different angles. To the brachython beside him, the page was terrifying. To Ethan. He squinted. Then frowned. Then slowly tilted his head. Wait a minute, he muttered. The symbols weren't math at all, not real math anyway. They were arranged in a grid. 9 by 9. Each subsquare was also a 3 by 3 unit. Some were filled in, most were blank. His jaw opened slightly. Oh my God, he whispered. It's Sudoku. 2 rows away, a Sarthi examinee had already short-circuited their auxiliary cortex. The puzzle was designed not to be solved, but to gauge how far a brain would push before surrender. The Galactic Council used it to rank intelligence, yes, but also obedience, persistence, predictability. No one was expected to finish the puzzle. Not even attempt the full structure. Most species weren't even sure what rules governed it. But Ethan? He'd grown up watching his mom burn through Sudoku puzzles over breakfast with a cup of gas station coffee. When he was 9, she taught him the patterns. Rows, columns, boxes. Logic, not calculation. Process of elimination. Simple. Elegant. He grinned and cracked his knuckles. The smart paper responded to his movement by rippling slightly, adjusting its perceived difficulty. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh? You want to play like that? He clicked his pen. Let's dance. Overhead, in the observation dome, Chancellor Galactic of the Pangalactic Academic Council swiveled one of his 12 eye stalks toward the human. Subject 94G7 is engaging with the problem, one of the assistants noted, adjusting their multispectra monitor. Predicted breakdown in 14 minutes, the AI moderator chimed. No, muttered Galactic. This one is calm. Not frantically searching. Not attempting tensor compression. He's writing. Writing what? The assistant zoomed in. Numbers. 1 through 9. Repeatedly. Sequentially. Galactic narrowed his left stalks. Primitive notation? No, sir. It appears, ordered. He's completing the grid by rule-based deduction. Galactic froze. Rule-based? No neural enhancement? No symbiotic calculus? The assistant's voice went up a register. No, Chancellor. He's solving it like it's a logic game. Pause test, Galactic snapped. Impossible, sir. Once initiated, the exam must be completed. Galactic stood abruptly, his robes of molecular silk twisting behind him. Then send a mentalist. Right now. I want to know what he's thinking. 30 minutes in, Ethan was halfway through the grid. It wasn't even hard. The puzzle was designed to confuse species with quantum intuition, not slow logic. In fact, the entire structure seemed to be designed to punish overthinking. The symbols weren't real numbers, of course, they were stylized glyphs. But once he cracked the translation logic, it was all pattern recognition. He was humming now. A little tune from an old Earth cartoon his dad used to watch. He didn't notice the mentalist arrive. A Sarathi ascended from beneath the floor, her body flickering in and out of phase, translucent tendrils trailing behind her like liquid crystal. She hovered in a spiral of containment rings and focused her attention on Ethan. She touched his mind. And recoiled. "Report," said Galactic through the comm. The Sarathi's voice trembled. He's not solving it the way we designed." "How then?" "He sees it as a game." "Of course it's a test." "No, sir. He's enjoying it." A long silence followed. Then Galactic whispered, almost fearfully. "He's playing." Exactly 1.5 Earth hours into the test, Ethan laid down his pen. He double-checked every line, every box. The logic held. The patterns aligned. It was done. The smart paper rippled once. Paused. And then emitted a tone, a soft chime no student had ever heard before. "Test complete," said the robotic voice, oddly hesitant. "Subject 94G7 has submitted a full solution." The hall went still. Every student turned to stare. The brachython beside Ethan dropped her stylus. A Sarthi's translation lights glitched out completely. A Meklarn coughed out a puff of coolant gas in disbelief. Ethan blinked. "Wait. That's not normal." Galactic was already on the move. The exam hall doors burst open, a team of academic enforcers flanking the Chancellor's throne chair. He descended to Ethan's desk with a speed surprising for a 12-limbed molluscoid. "You," he barked. Ethan stood slowly. "Me. You completed the test." Yeah. That puzzle has been administered to over 900 species across 2,000 academic cycles. No one has ever solved it." Ethan scratched his neck. "It's just a Sudoku, man." Galactic reeled. "A what?" "Sudoku. It's a human logic puzzle. This one was, like, medium difficulty? Bit weird with the symbols, but once I figured out the 3x3 structure and..." "Enough." Ethan shrugged. "You guys seriously thought this was math?" Galactic opened and closed 3 of his mouths. No words emerged. Then finally, "What else do you know?" Ethan blinked. "About what?" Galactic leaned closer. "About our other exams." Ethan frowned. "You mean the color sorting thing with the harmonic drones? Or that draw the missing shape test that looked like a Mensa puzzle on acid?" Galactic nearly collapsed into his chair. "Oh no," he whispered. "The humans weren't failing because they were dumb. They were passing by not caring." In a hidden conference room that night, representatives of the Galactic Education Council met in emergency session. The Meklarn archivist spoke first. "If this child's claims are accurate, our entire intelligence classification system is compromised." The Sarathi mentalist nodded grimly. "They do not perceive these puzzles as problems. They treat them as pastimes." Galactic gripped the edge of the table. "Then what does that make us?" Silence. Then a single word echoed from the speaker of an Earth ship entering orbit above. "Sup." The fallout from Ethan's Sudoku incident was immediate. Within 12 galactic hours, the Office of Interstellar Academic Integrity convened an emergency council. No press. No live streams. Just locked doors, multi-layered security fields, and minds strained to comprehend the implications. Someone had solved the impossible. And called it fun. In a rotating orbital station above Urix Prime, thousands of kilometers from Earth, Dr. Larenvi of the Meklarn Data Codex paced within a semi-gravitic field. His metallic carapace clicked nervously with each step. "We tested for cognitive rigidity. Dimensional intuition. Recursive self-awareness," he muttered to himself. "And," came a disembodied voice, one of the Council AI moderators. "We did not test for delight." The AI paused. "Explain." Larenvi stopped. We assumed suffering meant seriousness. That the depth of intellect was measurable by frustration tolerance. But humans, this one, solved it as if it were entertainment. His brain read recursive collapse patterns the way a musician reads scales. The AI's tone sharpened. You are suggesting we mistook playfulness for ignorance. No, said Larenvi slowly. I'm saying we mistook joy for incompetence. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Ethan was being held in a plush diplomatic debriefing suite that looked suspiciously like a Marriott. There was even a minibar. Ambassador Tessamino stood across from him, arms folded, clearly trying not to laugh. Let me get this straight, she said. You walked into the most terrifying exam in the galaxy, and finished it in under 2 hours because it reminded you of Sudoku? Ethan sipped from a bottle of imported sparkling water. Basically, yeah. I mean, it was kind of clever how they hid it. But once you realize every quantum glyph is just a stylized number from 1 to 9, it's over. Tessa blinked. And you didn't think to tell anyone? I didn't think I needed to. I figured the test was meant to be a logic puzzle, not like a sanity weapon. Tessa rubbed her temples. You cracked a pangalactic intelligence benchmark like it was the New York Times Sunday edition. I usually skip Sundays. Too many anagrams. Back at the Interstellar Academy, the reaction among students was split into factions. Some refused to believe it. They claimed Ethan had cheated, used hidden tech, or ancestral brain hacks. Others were afraid. Because the more they looked at the puzzle, the more it did look like a logic grid. And worst of all, a few tried to solve it again, and did, using human Sudoku logic. It worked. A quiet panic settled over the elite species of the academic elite. The humans hadn't broken the test. They'd understood the joke. In a transmission intercepted between two Illith academic overlords, the message was concise. The humans don't approach problems like the rest. They don't deconstruct. They recontextualize. They look at the thing and say, what if this is fun? The response. Find more of them. Quietly. A week after the test, Ethan returned to Earth with little fanfare. A few memes circulated, #Sudoku supremacy, trended for about 28 hours. A deepfake of Ethan fighting a brachiothon with a pencil went viral. But the real consequence wasn't online. It was diplomatic. For the first time in decades, the Galactic Educational Authority formally invited Earth to host a subcampus of the Interstellar Academy. And they didn't say why. Ambassador Tessamino, now aware of just how fragile the Council's pride was, knew better than to question it too loudly. Instead, she asked Ethan, would you go? He looked up from his tablet. He was doing a crossword puzzle this time. Go where? To space school. Ethan grinned. Sure. What's the worst that could happen? The worst, as it turned out, was interstellar academic warfare. Not with weapons. With puzzles. 3 months into his first semester at the Academy's Earth-Sol Annex, Ethan discovered that he was not the only student who saw the absurdity in the system. The Zarnan twins, Kielo and Threx, had grown up inside a gravity-fluid learning matrix that measured neural resistance by osmotic pressure. They were brilliant, irritable, and it turned out, deeply bored. When Ethan showed them Earth's math puzzles, Ken-Ken, Kakuro, logic grids, the twins became obsessed. Why are your tests solvable? Threx had demanded. Ethan raised an eyebrow. They're supposed to be. Kielo whispered, awestruck. You mean, there's always an answer? The three of them formed a study group. It quickly became infamous. They met in a neutral zero-G cafe called the Cognitive Bubble. Students gathered to watch their sessions. Ethan introduced puzzle tournaments. Others began showing up with strange artifacts from their homeworlds, ancient cipher tablets, unsolved riddle cubes, mind labyrinths. None of them could stump Ethan for long. And he never treated it like a battle. He treated it like play. That was what made him terrifying. Word spread. Suddenly, across 300 worlds, young minds were asking new questions. Is the exam flawed? Why did no one question the rules? Are there more human puzzles? By the end of the semester, a movement had begun. Not rebellion. Reform. They called it the Puzzle Renaissance. And they traced it back to a boy with a pen, a grin, and a weird little game called Sudoku. Not everyone approved. In the subterranean vaults beneath the council hall on Yurix Prime, the elders of the Pan-Galactic Intellect Order convened. A recording of Ethan's test session played on loop. They watched him finish the grid. Smile. Stretch. And wink at the surveillance drone. Wink. The Grand Moderator trembled. He knew. Yes, said another. And now the young ones ask questions we never sanctioned. A third added, their minds were forged for obedience. We built them to break against unsolvable walls. A long silence. Then, the human broke the wall. No, corrected the Grand Moderator. He walked around it. In his dorm, Ethan worked on a new kind of puzzle. He wasn't solving it. He was making it. A hybrid of logic, language, and symbolic inference. Something no single species' cognition style would dominate. When Kielo saw it, she stared at him in disbelief. What do you call this? Ethan smiled. A game. But there's purpose. Victory conditions. Constraints. Sure. But it's not math. Not chaos. Not pain. Nope. She looked at it again. It's fun. He nodded. Welcome to humanity. By the start of the second semester at the Seoul Annex of the Interstellar Academy, Ethan Graves had gone from curiosity to something closer to cognitive contagion. He hadn't intended to start a revolution. He just liked puzzles. But now, across dozens of worlds, students were re-examining the very foundation of how they thought, how they learned, how they interpreted challenges. The impossible exam had been cracked, and more than that, it had been laughed at. And in the highly stratified world of interstellar academia, laughter was more dangerous than treason. Inside the pan-spectrum classrooms of the Annex, lectures were no longer enough. Students questioned their teachers, politely at first, then openly. Why does this matrix require emotional suppression to solve? Why can't we test intuition directly instead of compressing it into quadratic symbology? Why don't we just simplify the damn thing? Ethan watched it all unfold with bemused detachment. He hadn't changed the curriculum. He'd just shown them another way. One morning, during a class on cognitive symmetry fields taught by Professor Drynex, a three-lobed neural specialist from the crystal shores of Thovok, Ethan received a message via datapad. Encrypted. Sender, unknown. Subject, we have questions. Attached was a set of coordinates. A location deep beneath the orbital hull of the Academy's original Yurix Prime campus. Off-grid. Not registered in any public system. Ethan's first reaction was, well, that's suspicious. His second was, let's go. The room was called the Cognitive Discontinuity Archive. It was ancient. Not just pre-academy, pre-council. Carved out of living rock and reinforced with interdimensional shielding, the archive was where the first sentient species of the galactic core had once stored their most uncomfortable findings. Ethan stepped through the narrow door, flanked by a dozen flickering field projectors, and found himself in a round room lined with stone-carved logic matrices, recursive thought labyrinths, and data crystals encoded with equations that defied standard time. 5 beings stood at the center. Not professors. Students. Brilliant ones. Some from top-tier legacy species. Some outcasts. All of them had one thing in common. They had started solving problems differently since meeting Ethan. Welcome, said a tall Irkani female with fractal tattoos along her jawline. You are the reason we're here. Ethan blinked. Did I miss a meeting invite, or? The others laughed, not cruelly. With relief. You're the first mind in recorded exam history who didn't try to think higher or harder. You thought sideways. Ethan scratched his head. So you want me to teach you Sudoku? No, said Abraxathan softly. We want to understand how you saw the rules and knew they were optional. Ethan looked around. You all solved it too, right? Once you saw the pattern. They nodded. But we'd spent our lives being told complexity equals intelligence, said a Kirellan with a smooth, opalescent skull. That beauty lives in the maze. Ethan grinned. Sometimes the maze is just dumb. The group became known informally as the Fork. As in, fork in the road. As in, a new path of thought. They met in secret at first, afraid of backlash. Then semi-openly. then fully. By the third semester, they were hosting cross-species logic tournaments. And losing to each other. That was the important part. They were growing by play, not pain. Back in the central hall of the Interstellar Academy, Chancellor Galactic was not pleased. He watched as enrollment in cognitive difficulty tracks dropped by 31%. Entire departments abandoned ancient strain models in favor of what the humans called game theory logic. Worst of all, some of the brightest species, those who had built the exam, were turning away from tradition. They have to be stopped, Galactic muttered. One of his advisors, a thin-framed Inari, hesitated. Stopped how? With all due respect, Chancellor, they're not breaking anything. They're just thinking. Galactic hissed. They're undermining the very fabric of hierarchical learning. The advisor shrugged. Maybe the fabric needs restitching. So the council tried something new. They invited Ethan to an exhibition match. Officially, it was a cross-cultural knowledge exchange. Unofficially, it was a trap. The game would be selected at random. Unscripted. Unprepared. On live feed to 30 star systems. The opponent, Dr. Lamina's Veldar, a mind composer from the Trinari cluster. His brain operated across 6 harmonic channels and 3 alternate temporal frames. He'd never lost a logic duel. Ethan said yes immediately. The arena was grand. Too grand. 7-layered auditoriums. Gravity-shifted viewing platforms. 1,000 species watching in real time, another 4 million tuned in via quantum feed. Ethan sat in a chair that tried too hard to be comfortable. Veldar floated in a suspended lattice, draped in neural silk and humming with resonance. The moderator AI spun the wheel of games. Randomization complete. The chosen game blinked into projection. It was a crossword puzzle. Earth-style. Veldar tilted his head. This is the test? Ethan grinned. Better get a dictionary. Veldar did not win. He wasn't defeated violently. He wasn't humiliated. He just couldn't understand the structure. The wordplay. The metaphor. The way the puzzle required you to know too little about everything to see the joke hiding in the question. Ethan finished it in 43 minutes. Veldar quit at 71% completion. The feed went wild. What happened next was no longer academic. It was cultural. Across species, people began designing puzzles for joy, not just pressure. Families built logic boards together. Dormitories hosted lateral thinking tournaments. Entire societies, like the Ulverit of the Obsidian Drift, rewrote their testing systems to include optional creative pathways. They didn't stop being smart. They just stopped suffering to prove it. And everywhere, one phrase echoed. Think like a human. At the Council Summit the following cycle, a motion was proposed by the youngest Karellan ambassador in history. I propose we add a new metric to intelligence. The capacity to make a problem beautiful. It passed. Barely. But it passed. In the quiet gardens outside the academy, Ethan sat with a puzzle in his lap. A new one. Still unfinished. The same students from the Fork were nearby. Talking. Sharing. Solving each other's creations. Tessamino arrived, hands in her jacket. You're aware you've basically created a galactic school club, right? Ethan smiled. It's just Sudoku, Tess. She sat beside him. No. It's not. You gave the galaxy a new shape for thinking. Ethan glanced up at the stars. Yeah, but what happens when they solve us? Tessa blinked. What do you mean? He looked back at his grid. When someone looks at humanity and says, oh, it's just a puzzle. She smiled faintly. Then let's make sure the solution surprises them. The first time the Galactic Council realized it had created a monster was not when Ethan beat the crossword prodigy. It was when they realized he wasn't alone anymore. By the start of the 4th semester, nearly 1/3 of the galaxy's premier academic minds, students, instructors, even some elder theorists, had adopted some version of what was now called the Graves paradigm. It wasn't a formal system. It had no credentials, no seal, no governing board. But its philosophy was everywhere. If a problem cannot be made fun, it's a poor problem. The elites, the ones who still clung to tradition, called it cognitive heresy. They were right to be afraid. At the council's inner chambers, the alarm was philosophical, not tactical. What's the endgame here? Chancellor Galactic snapped during a closed-door strategy meeting. We designed our entire structure around strain-based cognition models. Difficulty curves. Performance under pressure. An Inari advisor nodded. Yes. And the humans just walked in and said, why? Another muttered, and then made it go viral. Galactic's gaze narrowed. We are not adapting to human intelligence. We are being colonized by it. There was silence for a long moment. Then, quietly, someone at the far end of the table said, maybe it deserves to win. Back at the Sol Annex, Ethan stood before a crowd of over 200 students from 16 species. He wasn't giving a lecture. He was giving a demo. He held up a holographic projection of a puzzle he'd built with Kielo and Threx, the Zarnan twins, over break. It wasn't Sudoku. It was a hybrid of symbol chains, logic inference, metaphor translation, and visual recursion. It looked impossible. And then Ethan said, this is solvable by a child. He paused. In fact, that's the key. He didn't give them the answer. He gave them the rules. And then he smiled. Enjoy. They did. Some of them stayed up for days. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the revolution. It wasn't the solution. It was the joy of the solve. The galactic media couldn't ignore it anymore. News holos ran headlines like, Human Boy redefines academic sanity. Sudoku, Earth weaponized logic fun. Game or God. The Graves effect on cognitive culture. Some corners of the galaxy idolized Ethan. Others despised him. The term Gravesian subversion was coined by the conservative academic bloc, used to describe any theory or test that invited creative flexibility instead of linear rigor. Their campaign slogan? Academia is not a playground. To which Ethan famously replied in a recorded interview, if it never feels like play, you're not learning, you're performing. That clip was shared 38 billion times. Even on planets with no internet. In the most remote sectors of the galactic frontier, explorers uncovered ancient ruins, test vaults from precursor civilizations. Each had puzzles. Some had stumped modern scholars for centuries. Ethan took a look at one. A tesseract-shaped logic device found in the ruins of YYRR-Tan. He stared at it for 20 minutes, turned it sideways, and said, guys, this is literally a Rubik's Cube. He solved it in under 2 minutes. Then he taught others. The archaeologists were not thrilled. Theoretical physicists were enraged. Children across the galaxy were delighted. The fork movement, no longer underground, expanded into a semi-formal federation. Not a school. Not a club. More like a culture of thinkers who didn't believe pain was a prerequisite for brilliance. Their manifesto was printed in every known language and carved into the moons of the neutral territory between the Corellan and Illithan empires. We do not bow to mental torture. We do not hide from fun. We solve. We play. We build what's next. Asterisk asterisk. At the bottom, it was signed. Forks. And one kid from Earth. In response, the council convened a secret task force. The goal, break the fork movement. Or at least its symbol. They called the operation Project Labyrinth. The idea was simple: construct the hardest logic problem in galactic history. A multi-layered cognitive puzzle. Billions of variables. Adaptive, self-replicating, unsolvable. Built by the 12 most brilliant AI minds in known space. Guided by beings with no emotion, no subjectivity, no interest in games. The plan was to release it quietly, anonymously. Let the fork community chew on it. Fail. And then reassert academic dominance with cold, flawless difficulty. Ethan received the puzzle in an unmarked data packet 2 days later. It arrived as a cube of compressed thought code. No signature. No metadata. Just a challenge. Solve this. He powered it up. And stared. It was beautiful. Terrifying. And broken. Not in the way its creators intended, but in the way only he would see. He poked the first layer. It folded. He traced a logic knot. It pulsed, reactive. Then he smiled. They tried to make a trap, he said to Kielo, who had just entered the lab. They built a toy. For the next 2 weeks, Fork chapters everywhere worked on the cube. Ethan live-streamed his approach, not to show off, but to narrate his joy, his confusion, his process. Students watched not to memorize answers, but to learn how to love the question. And when he finally cracked the last layer, he didn't post the answer. He posted this. Don't ask how to solve it. Ask why you want to. The stream hit 1 trillion views. The cube became a galactic teaching tool. Project Labyrinth had failed, but education was thriving. Chancellor Galactic resigned 2 cycles later. No scandal. No fury. Just a short statement. I thought intellect meant surviving the storm. But these kids? They learned how to fly in it. He retired to a moon somewhere in the Mary Belt, where rumor says he now plays logic chess against himself. And sometimes smiles. 1 year after the Sudoku incident, Ethan was offered an honorary doctorate from the Galactic Institute of Cognitive Sciences. He turned it down. I'm still learning, he said, then handed them a new puzzle on the way out. They still haven't solved it. Somewhere in a quiet system where no one watched the revolution unfold, a child from a non-academic caste picked up a logic puzzle for the first time, not out of fear of failure, but curiosity. She solved it. She giggled. And that was how the wave spread. Not in a flash, but in millions of little ripples. People choosing to be clever for joy. All because one human didn't think the hardest test in the galaxy was a problem. He thought it was a game. A year and 1 day after the Sudoku incident, the Interstellar Academy, once the heart of galactic intellectual orthodoxy, held its most historic convocation in 10,000 cycles. They called it the Fork Conference. 12,000 delegates attended from over 600 species. Former rivals, skeptics, war-born nations, peacefaring engineers, biological minds, crystalline entities, quantum collectives. And all of them came to ask the same question. What's next? Not in military power. Not in economy. In thinking. Ethan Graves was not on the guest list. He didn't want to be. I'm not a symbol, he told Ambassador Tessamino as he backpacked through the dunes of Mars, collecting field notes on ancient logic artifacts. I'm just a guy who saw something familiar. You saw it first, she reminded him. I saw it sideways, he said. That's what scares them. At the Fork Conference, the keynote address was given by Dr. Kielo Zarnan, now chair of cross-logic innovation at the Academy's Cognitive Futures Department. Her speech was streamed on 11.2 trillion devices, across 5 dimensions. She said, "We grew up believing pain was the price of understanding. We taught our children that difficulty was the path to genius. We forgot what joy does to a mind. 1 year ago, a boy from a quiet world showed us the truth. A puzzle doesn't have to hurt to matter. A test doesn't have to break us to show us who we are. And a question doesn't have to come from above. It can come from beside us. From each other. From play." The auditorium, filled with the most advanced minds in the galaxy, went utterly still. Then it erupted in applause. Not polite. Free. In the aftermath of the conference, the galaxy changed, subtly at first, then profoundly. The cognition hierarchy protocols were dismantled. No more test rankings designed to fracture the soul. No more gatekeeping via unanswerable paradoxes. The Fork curriculum was adopted sector-wide. Learning shifted toward flexibility, not rigidity. Imagination, not recursion. Collaborative problem-solving replaced survival of the smartest. And the once feared galactic cognition benchmark? It was retired. Replaced with something called the playground. A rotating library of puzzles, games, open questions, cooperative builds. Students didn't compete for scores. They competed for inspiration. On a quiet outpost station above Neptune, Ethan finally took a break. No fanfare. Just peace. He spent his days designing new kinds of puzzles, collaborative ones. Games that couldn't be won unless players from different species thought together. He tested one such puzzle on a group that included a Brachythan monk, a Sarthi child, a neural cloud from the Illithan core, and an elder Corellan philosopher. They beat it. But not quickly. They laughed when they did. And Ethan knew that laughter was the sound of a better future. One night, If night can be said to exist above a gas giant, Ethan received a message. Encrypted. No origin code. No return signal. It simply said, "We saw your move. Here is ours. Asterisk asterisk." Attached was a file. Not data. Not instructions. A puzzle. Not in any known system. Not in any known shape. It pulsed with possibility. He stared at it for a long time. Grinned. Turned to Kielo, who had come to visit for his birthday. "Looks like we're not the only ones who play." She peered at the puzzle. "Can we solve it?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Eventually. But that's not the point." He looked out the viewport, where stars moved in ancient harmony. "The point is they want to play back." Somewhere in a distant galaxy, an intelligence older than time watched Earth. Not as a threat. Not as a curiosity. As an equal. They had waited. Watched civilizations rise and collapse under their own complexity. But now, they saw a species that used logic not to dominate, but to connect. Not to break others, but to laugh with them. And for the first time in eons, they sent a message. A riddle. An invitation. A spark. Back on Earth, in a classroom that now bore Ethan's name, a teacher handed a small 3x3 logic grid to a 6-year-old. She stared at it for a moment, grinned, and asked, "Is this a trick?" The teacher smiled. "No. It's a puzzle." She tilted her head. "Is there a prize?" The teacher leaned closer. "Only if you enjoy it." The girl looked up, eyes wide. "I already do." And the galaxy kept turning. Not faster. Not smarter. Just a little more curious.